Good evening. Hey, Logan. Shoot, that reminds me I need to send Hannah an invitation. So anyway, good afternoon. It's funny, my computer clock says it's 8 o'clock, but my phone clock says it's 8:05. So we'll start in a few minutes. Hola. It's actually night. You used the wrong form of it's. You needed an apostrophe. So tonight what we're going to do is we are going to discuss the Holocaust. We're also going to discuss some of the other mass atrocities from the 20th century, since that's what is in the chapter. So I'll probably actually start with the Armenian genocide and some of the fallout from World War I. Oh, thanks. Are you talking about this haircut right here? So we'll probably do that in a few minutes. And then also was thinking about maybe going over a little bit of point of view stuff, since some of you have been working on that. Okay, and I'll tell you about extra credit in a little bit here as well. So I'll do that when I'm done covering information. But the quick answer is you can just email it to me. Just take a picture and email it to me. But so actually, since we're going to do some point of view discussion, what I would like for you guys to do real quick is go and grab your AMSCO book, because we're going to look at one of the documents in that when you go through it. So I'm actually going to grab mine real quick, and I think it's on the floor right here. And I'm back. That was easy. All right, so the document that we're actually going to look at is going to be on page privacy reasons. I'll take a look at it. So page 517, and there's a picture that looks like that. So we'll do that after we do our discussion on the mass atrocities. So just to recap, grab your book if you don't have it, because we will take a look at that, and I want you to be able to see it. And then I'm going to start in 1 minute, because the last few videos, there's been like 18 minutes of this nonsense before I actually get into anything. Adam, I agree with you 100%. I was planning on taking my kids down to my parents tomorrow and maybe taking them fishing. No, Logan, it's the same for both. So, but that's okay. At some point, some of the other AP Euro kids might show up, and if they don't, well, it's all right. So you're in the right place. So anyway, I was planning on taking the kids down to my parents' house, and come to find out, my mom and dad have been just living their life like nothing's going on, and went and visited his sister, and his sister is sick. And I'm like, are you idiots? Like, I don't know what they're thinking. So we're definitely not going to go there. tomorrow. So anyway, all right, let's get started. So um, in your textbook, chapter 7.7 is called Mass Atrocities. That's all it's called. And it specifically looks at major incidences of people killing other people in the 20th century, but then it also includes the Spanish influenza. So I think that I should at least pay lip service to the flu real quick. It kind of makes sense since we're all in quarantine right now. But so in 1919, after World War One, there was a strain of the flu that broke out in the trenches called the Spanish flu. And the Spanish flu actually was taken home by the soldiers um, and spread all around the world following World War One. And it was a different strain of the flu. It was more virulent than other forms of the flu that people had before, and it was pretty devastating. It killed more people than actually World War One itself killed. And if you were to go back and look at records from 1918 to 1919, you'd see that a lot of people died in around 1918 because of this flu epidemic. And of course, there were no flu vaccines or anything like that back then. And so that's included, and you should know about that. It's another good example of how the environment can play a major role in history, radically changing the situation that people live in. And you guys are living that right now. So I feel like this is a very relevant point in history to sort of discuss the Spanish flu. So just recognize that that happens after World War One, and know what the Spanish flu was. If you get a question talking about human environmental interaction and some of those the consequences of human environmental interaction in the 20th century, you could use the Spanish flu as an example. Make sure you read through that section. Now, as far as mass atrocities are concerned, basically the definition for a mass atrocity, from what I can tell, from what they're defining as a mass atrocity, is a mass killing of one group of people by another group of people for a specific reason. And the first one that really happens in the 20th century is the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide was perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire against the Armenian people. So, in the northern part of the Ottoman Empire were the Balkan states, not the Balkan states, excuse me, the Caucasus states in the Caucasus Mountain region. Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, those countries. And they were on the border of Russia. And Russia and the Ottoman Empire had long had rivalry over these territories. And World War One is a continuation of that rivalry. And the Armenian genocide takes place in that context, the war between the Ottoman Empire and the Russians. The excuse that the Ottomans used for the Armenian genocide was that the Armenians were supposedly, helping the Russians during World War One. There's no real evidence that that was the case. It seems more likely that while there may have been people that believed that, that this was a genocide perpetrated against a group of people that were not considered to be, I guess you would say, Turkish enough. And one of the things about the Ottoman Empire during the period of World War One is that they were increasing the idea of Turkish nationalism and pushing the idea of what it was to be a Turk, which helped alienate certain individuals. And yeah, the idea that they were spying for the Russians was also widely spread. But either way, the number of people that were killed, which was, I think it was a couple 100,000 people were killed during the Armenian genocide. And this sort of is the earliest example of genocide in the 20th century, and it's one that the Turks are still in. They still don't admit it. They still they don't teach this in Turkish history, um, and so this is something that's pretty interesting. Um, okay, and so fast forward to the end or to the beginning of World War II, and what we see is the same general idea. And I think that the theme that I would point out with all of these atrocities is this is nationalism gone wrong in a lot of cases. Nationalism combined with ethnocentrism and racism in a lot of these cases. But when you blend your nationality with your ethnicity, then that can be a side effect when the idea gets extreme. And so the Holocaust has everything to do with Hitler's general idea. Hitler's general idea of you distracted me, Jessica. The Holocaust has everything to do with Hitler's general idea and the general idea of creating hi Kasama of creating the superior German race. Okay, so again, it's nationalism by exclusion, right? So to be German is to be white, to have blonde hair, to have blue eyes, and to look a certain way, to act a certain way. And if you don't meet those criteria, and yeah, I know Hitler didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, but nevertheless, if you don't fit the ideas of the German race, the Aryan race, then we're going to see you excluded from German society. And there was nothing that was sort of considered to be more non-German than to be Jewish. And I mean, you can see this going all the way back into the, following, Napoleon. In the early 1800s, you've got young groups of boys creating these like college organizations that were openly anti-Semitic. And so the idea of anti-Semitism had long been established as something that the Germans had considered themselves not to be. So yeah, that's kind of the the idea. And so Hitler takes this idea that had long been prominent in German thought, and he runs with it. And so part of his popularity is the fact that he pushes this idea, this racist German idea, against the Jewish people and against other groups of undesirables, or undesirables, like for instance the Roma, who were the Gypsies, and the Slavs. He pushes these ideas, and they were always strong undercurrents in German society, and then those people begin to sort of rise to the forefront and support Hitler as these ideas become more popular. And so Hitler's plan, what he refers to as the and actually that's a good point to bring up, Brian. Brian mentions the idea of Übermensch, which is an idea from Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a German philosopher, and he pushed this idea of turning the self into a Superman, or Übermensch. And Hitler certainly takes some of the ideas from this and incorporates them into sort of the philosophy of German nationalism and Nazism. Gosh, he even takes ideas from people like Martin Luther. A lot of people don't realize this, but Martin Luther was a huge anti-Semite. He did not like the Jewish people at all. If you were to read some of Martin Luther's writing about, I'm talking about the founder of Lutheranism, the guy that started the Protestant Reformation. He had a lot of very anti-Semitic things to say, and again, he's a German person. So being anti-Semitic in Germany is nothing new. And Hitler takes all these ideas and he bundles them up, and he comes to this idea of basically creating living space, or Lebensraum, for the German people. So there's two steps to this idea of creating living space, and we talked about the first step in our war in Europe, and the first step was actually taking land, and making it part of this larger German state. And he focused mostly on areas where German-speaking people were in majorities. So, for instance, Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia. But then the second part of this idea of Lebensraum, or creating living space, was to eliminate what he referred to as undesirable people groups from these areas to give more living space to the desirable people groups, to the master race. And so this two-part plan was based around the idea of creating labor camps. Well, you have the ghettos, which is the early places where the Jewish people are rounded up and forced to live together. The Warsaw Ghetto in Poland, for instance, is so large. People don't realize how large this place was. It's larger than, I mean, it's larger than Greensboro, to give you an example. I mean, it's a huge, huge ghetto. And so these these roundups of Jewish people, and then being placed into these ghettos, then facilitates the ability for the Germans to put them into labor camps. And I actually figured out how to use the thumbnail feature. And the thumbnail for this video was a picture of the gate into Auschwitz. And that gate, the writing over that gate is very famous, and it says, "Work will set you free." So these were work camps initially, at least that was the idea. But to be clear, while they were work camps designed to kill people. So even before we get to gas chambers, when I say work camps designed to kill people, what I mean is they had the German scientists had scientifically gone through and basically said, okay, a person needs this many calories to live for this long, doing this, exerting this much effort. And if we feed people, less than that number of calories, then they will begin to get sick and die. And that's what the Germans did. Like, the rations that they gave people in these work camps were scientifically and methodically planned out to be less than what was physically needed for a person to survive. So they were slowly starving the Jewish people to death. And Hitler's, this was, in the early stages of Hitler's Holocaust and move against the Jewish people. Now, as the war gets worse for Hitler, following something like Stalingrad, he decides that he needs to speed up what he referred to as the final solution. And if you see the term final solution, you should know that this refers to Hitler's plan to eliminate all of the Jews in Germany. Okay, so that's what the final solution is. And so in order to speed up the final solution, he began to incorporate, the Germans and the SS began to incorporate actual the gas showers and the furnaces and things like that. They were intentionally killing people as opposed to letting people die from overwork. Now, let me be clear, there had always been some people that had been intentionally killed. The Germans had, for instance, used guns and just shot people. I mean, the research you can do on this is pretty horrific, the different ways that people were eliminated by the Germans. But the point that I'm making is that the killing was sped up, and it was sped up methodically and scientifically. And I think that that's the thing about the Holocaust that sort of shocks people, or shocked people at the time, was because the Germans weren't just brutally killing people. They were using the latest and greatest technology to brutally kill people. They were taking, what was considered to be the advancement of humankind, the things that humans had come up with to make lives better, and they were using it to wipe out, to eradicate an entire group of people. And they came very close to doing so. 6 million Jewish people were killed during the Holocaust, and then 5 million other people. So 11 million people total were killed during the Holocaust. And that is a good point. Yeah, there were issues that with the German soldiers actually not being willing to shoot more people. Basically, the German soldiers, some of them were getting scarred from mental sicknesses, as you might imagine, from having to, sit back and fire machine guns into crowds of innocent people. And so the gas chambers was a more impersonal way of executing millions of people. It's really just insane how methodical it all was. and how merciless it was as well. You really have to, and Hitler did refer to the Jewish people as being vermin and roaches, and a lot of times I have a primary source where Hitler's giving a speech about the Jewish people, and everyone knows that Hitler was a bad guy and that he was racist and stuff, but until you read his actual words, when you read his actual words, it really kind of strikes a new chord. You realize, good grief! I mean, he was not playing around. He was not sugarcoating anything. He wasn't making anything like, it wasn't like under the radar racism. Does that make sense? I mean, it's right out there and very, very, very obvious. And and everybody knew exactly what he was talking about, and they were cheering him for saying those things. And yeah, so it's definitely pretty crazy. So when the Holocaust was discovered, it was originally discovered by Russian soldiers as they were pushing the Germans back in the late stages of World War II. So most of the concentration camps, I think only Dachau was actually in Germany. Almost all of the other ones were in Poland. So another thing you got to keep in mind is that the general German population, the civilians, were not super aware of what was going on as far as the concentration camps were concerned. And so it wasn't like if you were living in Germany during World War II, there was a concentration camp down the street. No, it was far away. They were in Poland most of the time. And so the Russians, as they were going through Poland, they began to uncover these concentration camps, and they were sending pictures out. And the rest of the Ally side was so shocked. They really couldn't believe that this was going on. I mean, like, people knew that Hitler didn't like Jewish people. They knew that he was racist against the Jews and other groups, but they didn't ever think that he was systematically eliminating people to the degree that he was until it was uncovered. And so it created quite a bit of shock. Okay, so that's kind of a very rough overview of the Holocaust. Fortunately, your English teachers, I believe, have done a pretty decent job of covering that, and you also read Night. So I feel relatively comfortable with your knowledge level there, unless you have any specific questions about the Holocaust. I'm going to talk about a couple of other mass atrocities, if you would like. Well, not if you would like. I'm going to. I just need to check and see where. Let me just look at your book real quick. There were a lot of civilian casualties in general. This is for Euro and for World, because we have to do this in both. So the civilian casualties in general in World War II were very, very, very high. Okay, so the rest of that chapter in your textbook really just takes a look at a couple of other examples of ethnic cleansing. So it takes a look at ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we get into the Cold War. And then we're going to look at the Rwandan genocide when we talk about decolonization. So read that section in 7.7 of your textbook for World. But in Euro, guys, read whatever it is I posted. I need to look back. I forgot. But that's the big thing there. Does anyone have any questions about the Holocaust? Okay, so what we're going to do is, if you're in World and you have your textbook, turn to page 517, and I'm just going to show you this image real quick. Okay, So you've been doing the point of view work, and so I thought it'd be a good idea to run through a few documents and show you how to point of view these things. And so, for instance, in this one, hopefully everyone's looking at it, you can see that there's this image of Hitler, and it says his name. He's got the swastika on him, and he's caught in a bear trap that is Stalingrad. And then on his back is the bear himself. And so, again, you can see the bear, and the bear is the Soviet Union. So if you were point of viewing, if you were going to do a point of view of this cartoon, then there's a few things that you could decide. You could try to analyze the artist's point of view. What was the artist trying to explain, and why was he trying to do it? Or you could maybe go for the audience. What was the audience? What type of audience is he targeting? This is obviously not a German audience that the guy is drawing this for, since it's portraying Hitler in a negative fashion. I mean, if you look, and actually, like, even that in and of itself is enough to probably garner points. So if you were to say, this is likely a cartoon that was targeted at targeted one of the Allied in an Allied newspaper, because Germans wouldn't portray their leader in this manner, and it shows the Germans sort of getting beat up on and a wimpy Hitler. Like, that's a pretty good analysis, surprisingly enough, and that would get you points. Explaining the why part that's going to be important here. But if I'm analyzing this, then I'm probably going to make the point that this is designed by an artist that is looking to point out Hitler's mistakes, because the bear trap was meant to catch the bear. Okay, then you could view this as Stalingrad was supposed to be a trap that Hitler was going to launch to catch Russia. Russia's the bear. Does that make sense? The siege of Stalingrad was supposed to be the end, in Hitler's mind, for Russia, but instead what's happened is he got caught in his own trap. And so and now the bear is attacking him. Russia's attacking him. So this is sort of the artist is trying to portray the fact that Hitler has been caught in his own trap, and because of that, he's being attacked by the bear. And so that explanation shows the historical context of the situation. Does that make sense? All right, let's take a look at another one real quick. So on the next page, on 518, I'm going to read it out loud. You can follow along with me. All right. So before I even read a document, I usually look at who it is, and this is American Women in World War II on the Home Front and Beyond, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And that's immediately telling me that this is a secondary source, not a primary source. And so this was written after the fact, not during the time period. And actually, because that's a secondary source, it might not be a great one to do a point of view on. So actually, I'm going to skip over that one, and let's take a look at page 529. 529. Man, these are all secondary sources. Hold on. Sorry. Sorry. My fault. We'll move forward. By the way, you should totally use the documents that are in here for practice. Not only just, like, I mean, I know that they have, all right, we're going to do this one on page 508. Okay. So on page 508, there's part of a speech by FDR, and we're going to use this. So um, it's a multiple choice question, but you can also use this for point of view practice. So this was an address given by FDR in Charlottesville, Virginia on June 10th of 1940. Perception of danger, danger to our institutions, may come slowly or it may come with a rush and a shock, as it has to the people of the United States in the past few months. This perception of danger, danger in a worldwide area, it has come to us clearly and overwhelmingly. We perceive the peril in a worldwide arena, an arena that may become so narrow that only the Americas will retain the ancient faiths. Some indeed still hold to the now somewhat obvious delusion that we of the United States can safely permit the United States to become a lone island in a world dominated by the philosophy of force. Okay, so if we're dealing with FDR and he's talking about the fact that the U.S. should be a lone island or a lone island in the world dominated by the philosophy of force, then this points to the idea, and this is 1940. So in 1940, the United States is not involved in World War I, but World War I is going on. It is not the Day of Infamy speech. No, that'd be 1942. So this is an isolationist speech, okay? That's the idea. I'm overestimating how many of you are looking at the book. Well, dang it, get the book out. So anyway, in this particular speech, I know that the United States is not at war in 1940 because I know that the United States doesn't join till 1942, right? And I also know that he's pointing out this idea of the U.S. being a lone island. So his motivation for giving this speech is to promote the idea of the United States being neutral and to continue to support the idea that the United States stay neutral during the course of World War II. We know that this will change after Pearl Harbor is bombed, and I could even mention that. But early in the war, FDR is supporting the idea of neutrality because he believes that it will be best for the long-term interests of the United States to stay out of the world's problems rather than to dive into them. And that's all you have to do a point of view here. Okay, so it really is pretty straightforward. You're just looking at what the motivation is. So when you're going through your documents, look at what the motivation is and why are they giving that speech? What do I know about it? You know, and that kind of stuff. So does anybody have any questions about that? I'm scrolling up for a second. I'm not leaving you out. Um, yeah, the primary source thing is due. Oh, I thought it was due tomorrow night. Does anyone have any questions about the primary sources that are there? Are you having any issues understanding any of them? Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Can you explain the Turkish? Yeah, absolutely, Alyssa. So Turkish nationalism really begins with the rise of a group known as the Young Turks. The Young Turks were They were youngish, which is why they get that nickname. But they were this group that were promoting Western ideas in Turkey. If you remember way back to like the 1850s, there was the idea of the Tanzimat reforms, which were a series of, it was the Turkish response to, it was the Turkish response to industrialization. And ultimately it failed, and it failed because of backlash from the Janissaries and backlash from the more conservative Muslims in the Ottoman government. But the idea of promoting Western reforms didn't 100% go away. It's just like anything else. If you think about politics, like just because a specific person isn't elected or a specific person fails to gain the attraction of the masses, it doesn't mean that the people that liked them before go away. And so the Young Turks is kind of a revitalization of the Tanzimat era, except it incorporates more nationalism and nationalistic ideas, and in particular, Turkish people focused on promoting other Turks into government positions of power. And that alienated other ethnic groups in the Ottoman Empire. And so Turkish nationalism has two effects. One, it helps pull the Ottoman Empire apart, but it also creates the national government of Turkey following the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So the Young Turks are both responsible for the end of the Ottoman Empire, but also largely responsible for the rise of Turkey as a nation state. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is the guy who's considered sort of the father of the nation. Ataturk actually means father of the Turks. And so there are a lot of groups that are alienated in this phase where the Young Turks are basically kind of trying to create Turkey and still hold on to all their territories, but are failing to do so. And so the Armenian genocide fits into that because they were one of these non-Turkish groups. But there were other groups as well. So, like for instance, the Arab Rebellion is going on at the same time during World War One. Lawrence of Arabia, the famous British officer, goes down to actually like lend aid to the Arabs as they revolt against the Ottoman Empire, since the Ottomans were on the side of the Central Powers. Does that kind of answer your question, Alyssa? This chat's actually way too much like my actual class right now. You guys talking about something completely different from what I'm talking about. All right. Anybody have any other questions? Alrighty then. Well, if I don't get another question in the next 3 minutes. Okay. In the document, he talks about how they translated the Quran, and I couldn't tell if it supported it or was against it. So the translation of the Quran is actually, it's like they're making Islam more mainstream. Does that make sense? I don't have the document in front of me, but if I'm correct, I think that he's sort of pushing the idea of Islam in a nationalist frame of mind. Like he's basically saying that it doesn't, that they can live together. Actually, let me pull that document out. Here we go. Which document is it? Is it the, it's obviously the one on Turkey. The third one? Okay. The Turkish nationalists have made great efforts to nationalize religion itself and to give it the impress of the Turkish national spirit. The idea was zealously supported by a fortnightly period and one of the noblest tasks undertaken by it has been the translation of the Quran into Turkey. Yeah. So basically, he's pointing out the idea that translating the Quran into Turkish is a good thing for the national spirit of Turkey, but this would have been considered a big no-no to the Islamic scholars. And so, I kind of mentioned before that there was this tension between the nationalists in Turkey and the Islamic scholars, and doing this would have made those people very angry. And so I would not say that he's against the Quran, but he's not cool with the conservative views of the Quran. Does that make sense? So he's kind of thumbing his nose at the traditional ideas and saying that this is a more modern version of Islam. I think that's how I would interpret it. So yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, the audience is leaving, and they have been getting smaller each day. I don't know if that's because people are finding it easier just to watch the rerun or what, but we'll see what happens after this exam. So I'm going to call it a night, and y'all have a good one.